And David, tell us a little bit about yourself and where your district is and about your campaign.
Yes, thank you so much, Eric, for having me. My name is David Kim. I am running for U.S. Congress here in CA 34, which covers downtown LA, Koreatown, Eagle Rock, Highland Park, Westlake, and surrounding neighborhoods. And I am running for office because masses of our people are financially suffering. They were suffering pre-COVID. 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet, 70% living paycheck to paycheck. In our district, we have per capita incomes in the lower 20Ks. The per capita income ends up being less than the average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment. How are you supposed to survive? Then we have lack of affordable housing. We have a homelessness crisis. And then we have oppression of our communities, even connected with cannabis and the war on drugs that was created by our government. So that's why I'm running. It's urgent times, Eric, and we need people running from our communities and no more corporate politicians.
We do, for sure. David, tell us a little bit about what you've done before and what your background is before you got into this race.
Yeah, so I am currently an immigration attorney. I defend respondents in immigration court when they receive their notice to appear, when they are seeking asylum. And so that's something that's really close to my heart. Before that, I spent years as a labor and employment attorney, working as an attorney for creative writers in the industry, because I felt that a lot of them were being taken advantage of by $10,000, $20,000 retainers by these entertainment attorneys who, when you realize it and you think of who an actor is, when we think of an actor, we think Brad Pitt or Jennifer Love Hewitt or whoever, but an actor here in Los Angeles is a working class person that has 2 to 3 jobs that is trying to make ends meet. But then when you have legal professionals taking advantage of that, and so I felt a need was there, and so I spent a lot of my helping there, and then recently I've been a local organizer and activist since 2018, having been activated in 2018 with various campaigns, and so really just putting in the fight and knowing that I had that 2 to 3 job hustle and grind for 8 years while I was in Los Angeles. It's time to say, hey guys, like, you politicians in office, you say that you did this and that, but have you really fixed the fundamental issues of our district and what the people really need? No, you're not able to connect with that. And because you can't, now's the time to get out. And so it's very encouraging to see just people from the community, from within our own run for office all across the nation.
And is this an open seat, David?
No, so I am running against an establishment Democrat who 98.8% of his campaign contributions are from corporate interests, PACs, big donors. So that includes the private prison industrial complex, police PACs. And I can go ahead and explain why those are relevant and why we need to really gut that in order for our members of Congress to really push forward legislation that's supportive of the cannabis industry as well, because they're all very interconnected.
Yeah, please do. Why don't you describe those connections, because as those in politics know, everything's connected. Housing and crime and labor are all connected. So yeah, talk about how those issues you're talking about are connected to the progress that we need to make on cannabis.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in regards to, I guess there's so many different, as you know, there's so many different elements. I was here watching Sept talk about the intersectional issues with that, with the LGBTQIA plus community, and then also just even with our Black and Brown communities. And for those who don't realize it, the war on drugs, broken windows policing, those were all created and propaganda just pushed forward by our government. You have policy advisors like Richard Nixon's policy advisor, John Ehrlichman, actually being quoted and saying, hey, there's 2 enemies of the White House, and those enemies are the anti-war left peace activists and Black people. But because you can't make it illegal to be against war or to be Black, why don't we get the public to associate marijuana with the hippies and Blacks with the heroines, and then criminalize them both heavily so we can disrupt their communities, arrest their leaders, go ahead and raid their homes and put them in bars behind prisons. And so with the US, we spend billions and billions of dollars just on marijuana arrests and low-level offenses, when we could actually be using that money, making things legal, decriminalizing, legalizing, and rerouting and reallocating those funds to our communities that actually need those resources and help. So it's interesting when you see that 2/3 of Americans are supportive of recreational use of marijuana, but why isn't it reflected in our electorate? And it's not reflected in our electorate because their corporate PAC donors are the private prison industrial complexes, are the police PACs that make money from this whole system. And it's that bigger picture that we also need to tap into and connect and realize, because even with my opponent, who is an establishment Democrat, who calls himself progressive, but he doesn't do anything progressive. He doesn't push for relief that the people need during this pandemic with mortgage and rent cancellation or items like that, or recurring monthly cash relief. And even when it comes to cannabis, we have three very important legislation that's in Congress right now. We have what's called as the SAFE Act, and that would allow cannabis businesses to have access to federal banking and to be able to go ahead and do payroll, open up a bank account, do lines of credit, be treated as all other businesses. And I mean, that's passed in the House, and thankfully my opponent voted yes on that as a majority. And I'm saying that with some, because he usually only jumps onto the bandwagon when a majority of Democrats have, and he doesn't really have the spine to step up and take the first stance. And I'll give you an example, because the later two bills, so that bill passed in the House is still stalling in Senate. There's another bill, the States Act, which is strengthening the 10th Amendment through our States Act, which is formally just, although cannabis is on the Controlled Substances Act and on that list, it's decriminalizing it in states where it's already legal or decriminalized or for recreational use, and doing a hands-off approach that the President Obama era had. And then also getting rid of a internal tax revenue code restriction that prevents cannabis business owners from deducting day-to-day ordinary expenses because they're associated with being one of those controlled substances. And so that's something, if we passed, would help the cannabis industry, would help patients so much all around. But it's considered too left, too progressive. My opponent hasn't endorsed it, hasn't talked about it, hasn't co-sponsored it. There's about 60, I think 63 or 83, I get my numbers mixed up, but there's about 63 co-sponsors. We have another one called the MORE Act, which would go ahead and just legalize cannabis on a federal level, while also expunging marijuana convictions and arrests, and then also allocating money that's brought in towards communities that need it the most, with housing, with education, with resources. And so if we were to actually push for that, we wouldn't have this situation with unlicensed cannabis businesses trying to operate under the down low, or cannabis businesses in general operating on cash flow. And that all leads to working conditions that we can't verify for, and that people might be living in horrible working conditions, wage theft, what have you, with illegal products coming in. And so in a sense, our federal government really needs to take the initiative and the leadership and the stance to step forward and say, hey, I know that we haven't been speaking about this, but now clearly the majority of Americans do support it. Let's start talking about it, because we can't encourage what's going on in our cities and counties like this with everything else that's so interconnected with that. And so even with this MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, my opponent has not had a say or has not done anything about it, because he's a corporate establishment Democrat. And so I was on here earlier and I saw a speaker talking about, once we get a majority in the Senate, the Democrats, yes, we'll do it. No, that's not enough. It's not enough. We need to push out the corporate Democrats as well, because they're all connected to money and the private prisons and the corporate industry and the pharmaceutical industry in that. And so I was watching that the speaker earlier, I forgot her name, congressional candidate, but to share about that, and Yes. So I do love the views that she shared, but I would just add upon that, no, we need to go a little bit further. And so, so those are just kind of my thoughts on that, since you had asked.
Well, David, I got to say, you have a great combination of both passion. You care about these things on a heart level, and about people's lives, but you also tie together the intellectual arguments really well, which will serve our industry well if you're elected. Fighting for the things we care about. I mean, you spoke a little bit about in your career, but also in some of the cannabis issues about labor. Talk about what the relationship between labor unions in this effort, and how cannabis businesses and labor can work together with government to create better jobs at better pay, that will help our communities.
Yeah, because because we have a system where cannabis businesses aren't able to deduct ordinary expenses, because considered trafficking of controlled substance because it's not even exempted because they're not being allowed to use federal banking. We have a lot of businesses operating under the table, and when you operate under the table, you're not able to really monitor what's going on with the labor and working conditions, and these people who are also getting paid are afraid to speak up because that's their job and lifeline on the line, especially during this pandemic as well, because they're not able to move forward with that. And so if we actually have our elected officials working on legislation, starting first with decriminalizing and then legalizing, then that's where we're able to give more protections to our workforce in the industry. And that's where we're able to then start working on a more intentional scale with labor unions in bringing and ensuring that people have living wages and are able to continue having the same, I guess, not privileges, but rights, whether it be meal and rest breaks. Because when you go into even just the dispensaries, a lot of these people are working 10 hours, 12 hours straight without a 10-minute break or a 30-minute lunch break. And you're supposed to get that. But then how are they supposed to file a wage and hour claim if it's all paid under the table and there's so many things that are awry in that and they're not being held accountable, and then there's this fear. And so I think for us to remove the stigma and the fear and to really allow people some breathing room to breathe is for our government to step in and say, hey, we acknowledge that this war on drugs was a lie that we created. Even Richard Nixon's policy advisor stated in an interview, was it a lie? Yeah, but hey, we pulled it off. The whole war on drugs thing. And so I think it's now for our officials to really realize and to learn themselves individually and not just have their bias of, oh, marijuana is bad, or, oh, it just makes you, no, really educate yourselves. It's your duty as a representative of the people to know what's going on and to connect. And it's your duty to find out what's going on with that. But we have a lot of elected officials who don't even want to go into the topic and explore it. And so I think it's really with that, because if our elected officials aren't doing it, then and this is kind of sad in the sense of, and I'll show you what I mean by sad, Eric, is in regards to some community members just within our community as well, they have this misperception of what marijuana smoke is as composed in comparison to cigarette smoke. They're totally different things, right. Totally different elements, but yet we have community members and neighborhood councils and whatnot have you bunching them up in the two together. And so because our own elected officials don't even have the initiative to learn more about it, how in the world are our community members going to? And so I think right now it's really important for those who are operating in the cannabis business and those who are in the industry to really be educated about this as well, and to realize, oh, okay, everything's designed against us, but let's not take that as to be like a Debbie Downer or a negative Nancy, but let's take that to our advantage. It's our time to really tell the truth of the healing benefits of cannabis in so many different ways, of hemp oil and everything else, and how it can actually help us in terms of, in comparison to these nasty pharmaceutical medicines and drugs that we have out there. And so I think it's really changing the framework of how we think and talk about things, and really throw away this old framework that we have that was really rooted back in the 70s and early government.
Yeah, David, listen, really appreciate it. I think that I'm watching some of the chat. There are people, yes, with exclamation marks and clapping yes for what you're saying. Clearly in you, we have a real champion of cannabis and the cannabis industry. We certainly wish you luck in your race. I know you're on the home sprint now, the last 60 days. Good luck with that. As I said before, we had Steve Young from Benicia, we had Chris Bubser from the 8th Congressional District, Seppi Shine from WeHo, and David Kim running in the 34th Congressional District. We got to support these candidates who are supporting us and doing what they can to help our industry. David, you're a very impressive guy with a lot of energy, and we wish you luck.